Good afternoon, everybody. I think out of respect for our time, we'll get started. It's just a few minutes after our scheduled start time at 3 o'clock. Thank you again so much for giving us some of your time this afternoon. This is the next in a series of presentations that we're making. We're calling them our Fall Accreditation Forum series. And like last week where we introduced a review of where we are throughout the process in the summer, we specified for you then that in the next 4 forums we were going to concentrate one each on key areas from the show cause report. So we have more than 4 recommendations, and what the presenters will be sharing with you when they take up the recommendations, as they will today, that they're combining some information in there as well so that we can try to show you elements of our show cause report as they relate to the 4 major recommendations and the other recommendations that have been folded in. It's also going to be an opportunity for input and feedback. As we said, this is the kind of the sun shining of those key elements of the show cause report now that we're going to be held accountable for, that we're going to be responsible for in responding to, and that's the reason we want to open them up and make sure that you all get the chance to see them. We're live streaming to Larry and Hanford, and so we do want to remind our presenters to use the microphones, and as we get into questions, answers, and comments, remind you to repeat those into the microphone so that they can hear those on our other 2 campuses. Without any further ado, the 2 staff members who will be helping us today are Dr. Thea Trimble and Kevin McCusker, and we'll be working on recommendation number 2.
I'm not really this cool. I just came from the eye doctor, and I'm blind in one eye, so I can't really see much. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Today, before we start, I want to tell you a little bit about what a show cause report is, or basically any report that has to go into the ACCJC. As Stan said, we have 7 recommendations that we have to address, and those recommendations are a result of our self-study that we submitted to ACCJC last semester, and then the site visit. So these recommendations came from the site visit team and were validated by the commission, and as such we need to address them. The recommendations are because in several areas of the actual accreditation standards we were not meeting the standard. That's why you get a recommendation. Accreditation standards are, in other words, best practices. If you are an institution that meets the accreditation standards, you are performing the best practices according to ACCJC. Because we have these recommendations based on the standards, in addition to writing up how we have addressed the recommendations, we also have to write up how we now meet the standards. And on top of that, there are eligibility requirements. These are requirements that an institution must fulfill in order to even be considered for accreditation. We have 4 of those that we have to address. And again, they also speak to the standards. Under the normal circumstances, when you're writing an ACCJC report, you would have committees that would be addressing each of these. Not one committee doing everything, but multiple committees. And it would be staffed by people who are involved, people who know what's going on in that area. They would write drafts, they'd send them out. They go up to a steering committee, which would read them, send them back, come back and forth, and through that process have something that makes sense and something that everyone can get behind. We simply don't have that time. The show cause report is well on its way, and what we're going to try and do today is to show you a little bit about where we were in 2012, that is, what got us into this mess, where we are now, and we have really accomplished a lot, and then the action plans going forward. In the reports, you basically have 3 sections under each heading. A description, that is, what do we do? An evaluation, how well does what we do meet the standard? and then any action plans. These are action plans that are designed to allow us to better meet the standard. In our case, we have to prove we actually meet the standards because that's what we have been shown to be deficient at. Today, we're going to be looking at campus dialogue. That was recommendation number 2. And if I can read my thing here, which I just barely can. In order to be more effective, the team recommends that the college improve its campus climate by encouraging all constituents to participate in an inclusive dialogue that embodies respect, civility, and trust. This recommendation is a recommendation that was also made by the visiting team in 2006. Part of the reason we're on show cause is the perception of ACCJC is that we do not address the recommendations. What's probably more accurate is that we do address them, but we don't, or we haven't so far, been able to address them in a sustainable fashion so that we backslide. And so part of what we need to do is convince them that not only have we made those changes, but hopefully that going forward, those changes will be sustainable. They're going to be sustainable. We have 6 accreditation standards that are listed for this recommendation. Those accreditation standards deal with governance, with planning, and with evaluation of processes, all of which hopefully obviously require dialogue. They require inclusive dialogue. Everybody needs to be at the table. Everybody needs to be talking to each other. What we're going to do in the next few slides is talk about where we were, where we are, and then let's look at our action plans. These are the action plans that are so far in the show cause report. So at the end, as Stan mentioned, what we're hoping for is that after this brief review, you will feel free to have questions, comments, suggestions. If you're reticent to speak in front of a crowd, you can anticipate that coming out in the next day or two will be a survey which will afford you the opportunity to anonymously make suggestions on any changes you think should be considered for the existing action plans, or any action plans you think that we might have overlooked that should be included. We will also ask at that time if you feel comfortable whether or not we can contact you for further information, for further explanation. If you do make 20 points off. That's what I tell my class. Electronics goes off, 20 points off your grade. If you do have suggestions for action plans, please be specific, especially as it relates to the responsible parties. Because one of the ways we can ensure that things get implemented is to have responsible parties, people that we can hold accountable to get these things done. So Kevin's going to take us on a little history trip.
Okay, so as Thea was saying, the format that we tried to use is to look at where we were in July of 2012 and then take a look at what's been done or what are the steps we've taken to address what was insufficient in July of 2012, where we are now in September of 2013. So looking at July of 2012, our governance systems operated with vague guidelines. So we had a lot of governance systems in place. We had bylaws or operating rules for them. Not everybody was aware of them. They were vague, and it led to some of the problems that landed us on the show cause sanction. As compared to where we are now, in September 2013, we have a governance manual that defines roles and responsibilities. So again, to look at that, what we've tried to do is take something that was vague, make it specific, codify it, simplify it, clarify it. And now everyone who serves on any of the governance bodies, whether you be one of the 3 senates or the subcommittees of those senates, you should be able to easily know what your duties are, what your roles and responsibilities are. And all of us within the college are the constituents of that that participatory governance system, which is now more focused on being a representative system. So your representatives should be accountable to you. They go to these senates and these committees to represent your interests as the representatives of your constituent groups, and they should be reporting back to you so that you are informed about what's going on. And so that hopefully goes to the issue of accountability and reporting, as well as governance.
Okay, the first action plan referenced in this part of the show cause report. Could you do that? Yeah, that's the next one. Has to do with implementing the newly codified participatory governance structures. I think we've had forums about this. It's been around. It's now been through the current participatory process, that is the Academic Senate, the District Governance Senate, and the Board of Trustees. So we have it on paper. Now the trick is to do it. And so one of our action plans is we recognize that we can have things on paper, but the most important thing is implementation. So this action plan basically is holding 3 entities responsible for this. That would be the Academic Senate, the District Governance Senate, and the Superintendent President. They will be responsible for ensuring that the aspects of the governance are fully implemented. And one of the things that we've kind of built into the system to hopefully ensure that this happens are a series of things that all of the governance senates and committees will be doing, which we've already started. The first thing that we have in place is that all governance senates and committees will use an initial organizational agenda that walks them through all the things that have to happen, especially as it relates to being transparent. Everybody needs to know what the meetings are, when they are, where they are. They need to go on a schedule. Everybody needs to know where the minutes are, where the actions are located, so everyone can follow what all the various governance committees and the governance senates are doing. That's a part of the initial organizational agenda that everybody is following. Another thing that we've done in the governance manual is that we have developed, and it's now in the process of being approved, a standardized evaluation instrument. The idea here is that we know that what we made in this last quick 6 months isn't perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But we have to be willing to look at it, recognize when changes need to be made, and in order to do that, we have to evaluate it. We have to be honest with ourselves, what's working, what's not working, and if it's not working, fix it. One thing I tell my students every year, they don't always listen, but I do tell them, if you study the same way every week, you're going to get the same grade. You know, it's just the way it is. And if you're happy with your grade, cool, do it. But if you're not, then you better change how you study. Same thing for us. If we want to go forward, we may need to change how we do things. If we're not happy with it, we need to change it. But we have to do that based on information, not based on personal preference. The final thing that we're doing to hopefully help this along is we've created, which we mentioned last week at the forum, the Implementation Task Force. The Implementation Task Force consists of members from the Accreditation Response Task Force that were involved with actually creating the manuals, that is the planning manual, the governance manual, and the resource allocation manual. Their job will be to actually help the District Governance Senate, the Academic Senate, and all the various governance committees actually implement this. They're there to answer questions. They're there to be an outside set of eyes to see, oh, you know what? That didn't happen over here. You have to do that. Don't forget that. And also to identify issues across committees that an individual committee may not see a problem, but if you look at the interaction between the committees. An example, let me give you one that's already come up, at least in the one committee that I'm on, is that the governance manual states that the District Governance Senate will have one co-chair from each one of its committees as a member, as a voting member. That means they have to go to the meeting. The problem is that eliminates one meeting day because our co-chairs have to be at the District Governance Senate. And as all of you who are involved know, it's really hard to find times when people can get together. So that may be an issue that's going to have to be addressed sometime in the future. That's an example of the type of thing that's going to have to potentially be addressed in the future. Any questions about this action plan, what it means, or who's responsible? Yeah. They are going to be on, I'm not sure the name, is it the master calendar's name has changed. The question was, where can people find all the meeting times and places?
And we are in the process now of getting all of those located in one place. If you go onto our website, right in the center of the menu bar that comes across the middle of the website, you'll see calendars. Click on that and you'll see one that says full calendar. That in the software system is called the COS Active Calendar, and that COS Active Calendar has all the governance meetings and committees, times, dates, and places.
Anything else? Oh, there we go. Calendar. So for those of you in the other places who couldn't hear, under the governance structures, all the meetings will be listed for each of the governance senates and their committees as well. So 2 different locations, both available off the opening webpage.
Okay, so in July of 2012, we were at a point where strained labor relations made governance less effective. And with the changes that we've made that we're talking about now, what we've tried to do is set it up so that the processes for employee representation as well as employee participation in governance are defined. They are equally important. They're equally valuable to the college, but they now operate in distinct roles simultaneously. So it's not a lessening of one, it's more of a clarifying of the roles in the way that these 2 very important systems work. And by clarifying that in the governance manual, the attempt is to try and keep the systems operating more effectively by keeping them on task, keeping the scope limited to what they're intended to be in the new format.
Okay, the next action plan, again, is about making sure that everyone on the governance committees, governance senates and governance committees, understands what their charge is. Because part of the problem that we ran into over the years, in addition to the fact that we had a bazillion committees, is that each committee started to get mission creep. So that over time they'd take on this little task and then that little task and then another one. And sometimes it was hard to tell where their scope ended and where a different committee's scope began. So one of the things that will happen at the beginning again of every school year is the members of that committee will review what the charge of that committee is. In addition to looking at what the charge of the committee is, you also need to look at the specific tasks that have been given you. Both the governance manual and especially the planning manual have specific timelines on which things need to be done when and who's responsible for doing them. So by having each committee review that at the beginning of every year, Hopefully then it will keep them focused and moving forward on doing what they're going to be responsible for, because trust me, looking at some of these tasks, they're going to have enough to do. They're really not going to have a lot of time to do a lot of extra stuff. Any questions about this action plan?
So in July of 2012, we were in a place where unclear reporting structures led to inaccurate information or a lack of information distributed regarding how decisions got made or how the governance bodies were functioning. Where we are now is that reporting structures have been clearly defined. We have timelines and we have tools for assessment and reporting. Thea touched on this a little bit before, but the addendum that's being generated and going through the process now for the governance manual includes a timeline of how the various bodies would assess themselves, how they would assign initiatives at the beginning of the year, do a midterm evaluation, and do an end-of-the-year report. What's more important, though, I think, to keep in mind is not only is that nice and clear, but the assessment tool itself, the self-assessment tool for the various governing bodies, are each one page. So it's not an onerous process. It's something that's simple. It'll keep everybody on task, and it'll allow us to continue to operate without taking on, making the assessment part of it an extra workload or an extra burden on these various bodies. The other thing to keep in mind with the reporting structures are that we now have clearly defined responsibilities for people who sit on these bodies. It's important that people sit on those bodies because of their expertise and their knowledge, but they're also there to represent constituent groups, and they have a responsibility to voice concerns and raise issues on behalf of their constituents, and they have a responsibility to report back to their constituents.
This action plan, again, is speaking to assessing planning. It is particularly important that dialogue be present if you're going to have any meaningful planning. The planning manual clearly states which governance committees are going to be responsible. In addition, there will be specific task forces that will be instituted at the right time. Their charge will be very clear. Their timelines for completing their tasks will be very clear. But we have to make sure that all of the information generated out of a task force, out of committees, out of senates is available, so that everyone knows what is the information, what's the data on which we are basing the decisions we make. It's not just having the data, it's using it, and it's making sure everybody understands why that data led to a particular decision. So again, it goes back to evaluations and reporting. One of the things, for example, in Senate that we have already begun is we're going through the process of approving a reporting schedule, so that all of the committees that report to the full academic Senate, and I believe we have 8, know when we expect reports and about what. Now, this is in addition to their minutes. These are reports where they basically report out what they're working on, what progress they've made, just to keep everybody up to date. It's also the reason why all the faculty will now have a fuller inbox in your email. We're now going to be sending out the agendas, the minutes, and all of the packet information that goes to all of the senators, so that any faculty member that's interested can look and see what's going on. And again, being open and transparent is part of dialogue, and it's certainly part of building trust. The planning model that we have generated requires that kind of open communication, and especially the willingness to evaluate that communication and whether or not it's sufficient. Any questions on this action plan? Okay.
We're incredibly time efficient here because that brings us to our conclusion. So I just wanted to sum up by, these all fall under the heading of campus dialogue. And to reiterate, Thea read part of the recommendation at the beginning. And just to reiterate, the recommendation was that we, quote, improve the campus climate by encouraging all constituents to participate in an inclusive dialogue that embodies a culture of respect, civility, and trust. Doesn't say we have to be friends. Doesn't say that we all have to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. It says we have to respect each other. So we have to respect our organization. We have to respect the systems that we're putting in place. We have to be civil in our interactions. And we have to trust the systems we're putting in place and trust each other to work in good faith within those systems. So good campus dialogue doesn't have to equal agreement. There's no way to ensure agreement. And you can't really think of agreement as good dialogue. It's not necessarily. Disagreement can be productive for an organization. And what we're trying to build here are systems that allow for productive disagreement rather than disruptive disagreement. I think that's about all I had to say.
You've all seen this before, and you'll be seeing it over the next 3 weeks as we go forward. We would like to thank everyone for their involvement, not only in these forums, but in all the feedback that the Accreditation Response Task Force have gotten from various surveys and things that we've sent out. We could not have accomplished what we've done in the last 6 months without everyone pulling together, not just the people on the committees. Also, thank you for your time. I know we've had a lot of forums, and we have 3 more. So hopefully you can come back. Please remember that there will be a survey going out, and please give us any feedback you feel we need to address in the show cause report. We want to make sure that we cross all T's and dot all I's. Any other questions, concerns? Wow, you get out of class early.
Let's thank Dr. Trimble and Kevin McCusker. As you can see, I think we're getting pretty succinct now, pretty precise in how these final key points of the show cause report are coming together. And this one really has been a biggie. When we all saw those 2 words come out in the accreditation report, campus dialogue, it conjured up those feelings that we have about how complicated sometimes our communication becomes, how emotional it becomes, and in some cases, how personal it became. And what we've really tried hard to do, I think what they've shown you today, is that we've tried hard to structure systems that give differing points of view an opportunity to operate simultaneously. They're both important, but to function parallel to each other with respect, with civility, with communication. And the little story I like to tell, and it's not the best example in the world, but I think it'll go right to the heart of the elephant in the room. And that is that when you have your employee representation and advocacy and collective bargaining processes going on one side of the institution, and you have our professional responsibilities for academic and operational and institutions going on the other lane in the institution, they're both important responsibilities, and some of the same people are participating in both. So you can be in a district governance senate meeting with us or an academic senate meeting with us in the afternoon, working hard on solving an operational problem in the college. And you could, if you chose, if this was the circumstance, be at the Board of Trustees meeting that night with your picket sign complaining about what we're not doing in negotiations. And those 2 are appropriate roles for you to play. One doesn't exclude the other. The difference in what we're describing here is that we like each other and we care about each other, and we're not going to let those roles deter from the important processes that each of them need to play respectively. And that's a different culture. That's part of COS 2.0 that we want to make sure we build to last, as Thea said, so that we don't slip back. And 6 years from now, they're not coming to visit going, they really didn't change it structurally. I believe we have the foundation now to change it structurally, and we're feeling almost relieved about having that in place now, because the more of us that believe in that and operate within that are going to be able to keep the college on the right track, regardless of how those conditions ebb and flow over the years, because we know there are going to be disagreements. It's a healthy environment when you have some disagreement. How you work it out really defines who you are as an institution. So again, thank you very much. If you enjoyed this, guess what? We'll be back here next week. Meeting adjourned.